Hello, everyone. I'm going to be talking about this recently concluded minor research project, which is, I don't know, half checking in on the status of the visas program by use of a survey. But I asked the IRB and just in case I wanted to publish the results. So this is the form that I'm going to publish them in, at least until I have the inclination and the time to write an article about it. So it's about VISAS programs. Visa is a type of volunteer program. If you don't know, it's actually not related to having an F1 or a J1 visa or anything like that. It's just the name of a particular type of volunteer program, which you might also have at your university. And the importance of making contact. That's sort of previewing some of the results that I'll get to later. So again, what is VISAS program? The VISAS part just stands for Volunteers with International Students and Scholars. In short, it's a volunteer program to uh, facilitate a little early in the presentation to be tripping over my words already. Facilitate contact between the domestic and the international student populations and help them make friends. And I am the coordinator of the visas program at Southern Utah University. So that's the capacity in which I am making this presentation. I'm responsible for recruitment and administration and verification of hours and all that good stuff. I also periodically make presentations about it like this. At some point, I'll put a link to one that I gave before that gives a more thorough introduction to the program. So the program has three different roles for volunteers. The first one is the one we're mainly going to be focusing on today. It's called Language and Culture Consultants, which is a fancy word for conversation partners. It looks better on a resume. That's why we go with Language and Culture Consultants. By the way, I didn't create this program. This program was handed to me by our director, who had run a similar program at his previous place of employment. So the terminology mostly comes from him. Not that I'm blaming him. I think it's a fine name, and it does indeed look good on a resume. So classroom assistance is another role that people can volunteer for. This is basically like a TA in an ESL class. A lot of the people who volunteer for the classroom assistant role are also students in our TESOL certificate program. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And volunteers can also come to a weekly social event called Visas Cafe. It tends to be about like 90% international students at the Visas Cafe who are, there for fun and games and also free chips and sometimes free other stuff. Oh, well, it's usually chips or cookies. But volunteers can also fulfill an hour requirement by spending time at Visas Cafe. It's only every Friday for 1 hour, but it's pretty fun. I also run that. I also go to all of those and buy the food and all that. That's actually the biggest weekly commitment in terms of hours is just shopping for Visas Cafe. Everything else, as I'll get into later, is mostly run through email and spreadsheets. So focusing more on the conversation partners, aka language and culture consultants, just to show you the workflow from my perspective of setting up conversation partners and also what conversation partners experience as they sign up for the program. First of all, usually after hearing one of my spiels or hearing about the program from their roommate or something like that, they sign up using a Google form, either from like a QR code around campus or something like that. The people who I'm calling assistees here are people, usually international students. Well, all the assistees are international students. They sign up looking for a conversation partner to help them practice English and also just, to have a kind of a friend on campus. The volunteers, the reason I'm not just calling them domestic students and international students is that volunteers are sometimes also international students who are advanced enough in the intensive English program to begin thinking about helping other students, or are graduates of the intensive English program or have never been in the intensive English program. Like a lot of international students are from like the Netherlands or something like that, and they usually don't take our intensive English program at all. Anyway, that's why I'm not just calling them domestic students and international students, but volunteers and assistees. So they sign up. The volunteers have to take a training, which is just watching a video. The program director, that's me, matches students up. I've got two spreadsheets. One is for the assistees, one is for volunteers, and I look at who's next in line, 90% of the time, that's not scientific. Most of the time, I just go with the next person who's available. Occasionally, someone will have asked for someone of a particular language background to be paired with, and we will try to accommodate those. But very often, they are asking for a language that's not actually available. So it's usually first come, first serve. The pairs after that, I email both of them and tell them that they've been paired up. And after that, that's usually the last time I contact either of them, right? So the pairs, after they've been paired with each other, they contact each other and then agree to meet at a time and place of their choosing. So that's usually it. I'm not there for those meetings, obviously. I don't accompany them when they meet each other in person. And if the pairings go smoothly and there are no problems, then I don't hear from them after that most of the time. And that's by design, because the pairings, if they're signing up for the right, well, I don't want to say for the right reasons, but if they're signing up to have the experience of meeting someone from another culture, and obviously the assistee is signing up to meet a domestic student and practice their English, or meet a more experienced English speaker and practice their English, and there's no further need to contact me after that. So by design, this is usually the last time I hear from them. Okay. So as was implied earlier, the volunteers can check in after that if they've had some kind of a problem. The assistees can also check in if they have a problem, although usually it's the volunteers who are asking me for help. And this happens occasionally, if they need verification of their hours. For example, if they signed up to volunteer as part of a service requirement for another class or something like that, right? Those are the circumstances in which I usually do hear again, and usually it's from the volunteers, right? So that's a little more explanation of what conversation partners do and how they get set up in their volunteering. So as I said, the volunteers don't all ask for verification. So my verification of their hours and my checking in with them, well, I never check in with them unless I've had some very particular reason for doing so. They will check in with me only in very particular circumstances, like their partner ghosted them, or they need verification for their hours, as I said before. So out of all the signups from the last academic year that just ended now, actually ended today, as of this recording, 58%, that's 55 people, filled in the check-in form at least once. And most of them didn't really need to, because as you see here, only 8 asked for an official verification of their hours. That's total over the whole year. So most volunteers don't need to check in with me, and I don't have any data on how often they're meeting their partners or anything like that unless they check in, right? So what I mean to say is the information that I have on the volunteers is pretty piecemeal and insubstantial. So part of the purpose of this this research project, which this presentation is about, was to find out what actually the volunteers are doing when they meet, in particular the conversation partners. So I have a helpful graphic to help you visualize how much of VISAS is conducted in the dark, right? So volunteers sign up, international students sign up, something happens, and then something else happens, right? Sometimes the volunteers ask for verification. I hope the volunteers are enriched by their experience. I hope the international students are better at conversational English because of their experience, but I really don't know, because they don't. I mean, by design, there's no way for me to regularly verify their meetings or their results of their meetings. And there's no way for me to verify really what they're doing most of the time, right? And so again, this research project was to help, put some data here. What are the volunteers and international students who meet up actually doing when they meet up? How often are they actually meeting? Where are they meeting? And then what do they think after the program is over? What have they gained from it? Okay. So I do this every time I make a presentation. I talk over the content of the next slide before I actually get to it. So this is pretty much what I just said. Okay, let's go on. So what did I actually do? So I basically did this all by survey, again, by Google Forms. I just sent after getting IRB approval and all that, I just sent surveys to all the volunteers and all the international students who signed up. Again, I shouldn't say international students, all the assistees, again, because some of the volunteers are also international students. To all the ones who signed up, even the ones who I knew weren't volunteering anymore, like they had told me they couldn't, they didn't have time to meet with their partner anymore, so find a new partner for their old partner. Even if they had sent me an email like that, I still sent them the survey, right? And that led to the first immediate finding, which is that the rate of response for international students, we keep saying that, for the assistees, was much lower than for the volunteers. The volunteers had a pretty normal response rate of about 14%. For the assistees, it was less than half of that. And as a result, I wasn't able to include data from the assistees. I was hoping to make a comparison between what the assistees thought and what the volunteers thought, but that mostly didn't happen just because there was so little data from the assistees. And, I'll talk more about this later, but it is part of a pattern of trying to reach international students by email. And here I do mean international students, not strictly assistees. Right? So what did I find? Basically, in terms of what the volunteers are doing when they interact with their assistees, almost everyone texts. And almost everyone also met somewhere on campus at least once, right? Much less often they will do volunteer work together, drive somewhere together, go to church together. That was something I knew to look out for because I'd heard anecdotally that happened pretty often, but not as often as texting or meeting somewhere on campus. Those were by far the most common activities. So volunteers reported strong personal benefits from participating in visas. Again, I'm mostly not giving the data from the assistees just because there wasn't very much of it. Okay. This depended, though, on the partners being able to meet. When partners said that they had trouble reaching their assistees, when the volunteers said they had trouble reaching their assistees, they were much less likely to benefit from the program or to say that they benefited from the program, right? And here we have this in more technical language. The ease of setting up meetings was correlated with a host of positive experiences, meaning that if you had the usual correlation chart that comes with the data for any kind of survey, the correlations for it was easy to set up meetings with my partner and most other positive affective variables, things that measured how they felt about the program, had a positive number in them, meaning somewhere between like 0.3 and 1, right? And that was more true for just the ease of setting up meetings than for other variables. And let's show you some charts to make that a little more clear. So first, the common activities, and this is for all participants, including the assistees. What did they say they did the most often? A 1 just means 100% of the participants said that they did this, which is interesting. I mean, that's maybe a Gen Z thing, right? People text much more often than they call each other, obviously, and then meeting up, as you can see, people meeting on campus was pretty common, but not as common as texting, right? That surprised me, but maybe that's just because I'm a lot older than my students. I mean, slightly surprising for me was how few of them played video games together. I often see people playing video games in the student center, and it seems to be usually a group activity. People are often playing FIFA together, but at least out of the people who answered my survey, nobody said they play video games together, right? Also, this one, we talked about English grammar or vocabulary, was higher than I expected. It might possibly be a result of the sampling bias of the survey, like the students who were more likely to be TESOL students were more likely to answer this survey. And they're more likely, of course, to be comfortable talking about grammar or vocabulary with their assistees. Although the VISAS training specifically says they don't have to do this, right? They're not tutors, right? VISAS volunteers are not tutors, or at least their role in visas is not as a tutor. They're conversation partners. So again, that was higher than I expected, right? Other ones, I mean, you can read them all here. A lot of them are pretty low, which I was surprised by. There's some something possibly recommended by this finding, meaning that it's possible that I should stipulate to volunteers that they should try as much as possible to actually meet their assistees rather than just texting with them, or even at some point saying texting doesn't count as volunteering. I don't know if we're at that point yet because, again, meeting on campus is still pretty high, but I don't want the volunteer program to get to the point where people are assigned a partner and then only text with them. As an English teacher, I want students to have a variety of different, modes of communication with people. Texting is one mode of communication that's very important, but it's obviously less immediate than oral communication face to face, and involves different kinds of skills, right? So I hope that these other numbers come up, right? Or I hope in the future that texting does not predominate as it seems to be doing here. So, other survey questions, and these values I'm reporting only for the volunteers. And again, I was initially hoping to make some kind of a contrast with these, but there just isn't enough data from the assistees to report anything. Right, so most volunteers said it was easy to contact their partners. Most said it was easy, but not as easy to contact to set up meetings, right? And that is good. Most said they were not nervous when communicating with their partner. That's also a good thing, right? And interestingly for me, it was about a little less than 50%, saying that they often interact with students of the same nationality as my partner. To me, this speaks again to the benefits of a visa or visas-like program. Again, this is the volunteers who are reporting this. It means that you can't count on them often talking to students from Congo or from China or from Korea, which a lot of our students, international students at SUU are. And so the visas program is giving these volunteers a somewhat unusual experience. This number, by the way, was higher for the international students, the assistees. Again, all the assistees are international students, but so are some of the volunteers. And that again would be expected because it's more likely that international students are interacting with a lot of Americans than a lot of Americans on campus are interacting with people from the Congo, right? Just because there are a lot more Americans on campus. Anyway, so this for me is basically good news. Again, like I said earlier, the volunteers report having positive experiences, positive effects on their lives from volunteering with visas. I was happy to see they felt their communication skills improved. They felt more open-minded. They were interested in their partner's culture. As I said, a lot of Americans have never talked with someone from the Congo before, or definitely most SUU students don't regularly talk to students from the Congo. I think I had never met anyone from the Congo before working at SUU. So this is, again, a positive thing. The planning to stay in touch with their partners after the semester, that's also higher than it is low. I mean, it's higher than 50%. I hope that would be even higher than this, but as it is, it's still good news. All right. This slide shows two sort of matching items from the survey. These are all from the volunteers' answers, but the volunteers were asked to report both on how often they thought they talked about their home culture, and then also how often their partner talked about their home cultures, right? So again, from the volunteer's perspective, the blue bar means the volunteer thought they talked a lot about their home culture. The red bar means the volunteer thought the international student, the assistee, often talked about his or her home culture, right? So these were mostly not statistically significant differences, right? And the differences, I don't know what I would make of them anyway. It is interesting that the volunteers often felt that they were more interested in the partner than the partner was interested in them. And that goes for, both as an individual and then also as a representative, I guess, for lack of a better word, of their culture. But again, I'm not sure what to make of it. This could be sort of an artifact of the language skills being involved. A lot of the international students who are assistees in the visas program have fairly low language skills, and it just might not read as clearly that they're interested in their partner's culture, even if they are, right? So again, I don't know what to make of this, but it's, Here it is. That's what you say on a slide that's not particularly useful. Here's some data. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Oh, this slide's slightly too big for my window. Okay. So as I said, the the item that read, "It was easy to set up meetings with my partner," and had a Likert scale running from 1 to 5, had a positive correlation with many items in the survey, meaning that students who thought it was more likely to set up meetings with their partner were more likely to feel that they got some kind of benefit from the program. And correspondingly, as you can imagine, students who had more difficulty setting up meetings with their partner, meaning they rated that item low, were less likely to feel that they got a benefit from the VISAS program. And that's in some sense obvious, but I do have data to back it up as well. These are the correlations with, sorry, not correlations. These are the two different averages for these items. One for the population of volunteers who gave an answer of more than 3, meaning 4 or 5, to that particular item of "it was easy to set up meetings with their partner." The pink bar is people who gave an answer of 3 or below, right? So 1, 2, or 3. The blue bar is 4 or 5. Okay. This is sort of a, I don't know, easier to visualize, but less scientifically valid way of presenting correlation data, right? So as you can see, people who rated easy to set up meetings as 3, 2, or 1 talked about English vocabulary a lot less than students who rated easy to set up meetings 4 or 5, right? And like I said, everyone said they texted with their partner, so there's no difference there. I mean, what I mean to show by this slide is just that having an easy time setting up meetings with your partner makes a lot of other activities easier to do. And in some sense, that's obvious. But again, I wanted to show you the receipts. Okay. And here are the results for each of the other items in the survey. So the last slide was activities. This one is Likert scale ratings of their agreement with questions. Sorry, not questions, but statements. For example, "I am more interested in my partner's culture as a result of our meetings." People who rated "it was easy to set up meetings" as 4 or 5 were a lot more likely to give that a high number. Well, somewhat more likely to give that a high number than people who said "it was easy to set up meetings" 3, 2, or 1, right? Like I said, not particularly scientifically valid, but just a different way of visualizing the difference between people who had an easy time setting up meetings and people who had a difficult time. Okay. So next slide is only the ones that were statistically significant. Okay. These ones, when you compare these two populations, people who said 4 or 5 for this, oops. Okay, this should say less than or equal to 3, not greater than or equal to 3. People who said it was basically easy to set up meetings and people who said it was somewhat too difficult to set up meetings created statistically significantly different populations for these particular items. And again, that should say less than or equal. Boy. Anyway, so, I mean, the first two are obvious, and actually the second one is sort of, what's the word, tautological. Obviously, if you split these into two different populations, they're going to differ in a statistically significant way. Slightly more interesting and less easy to predict is that the people who said it was easy to set up meetings also felt that their partner seemed more interested in them than the people who had difficulty set up meetings, right? The people who had difficulty setting up meetings were statistically significantly more likely to say they had difficulty understanding their partner. And it's pretty easy to imagine that these could be language related. If someone had difficulty arranging a meeting, it could be because of language. And of course, difficulty understanding your partner could also be because of language. Yes, but not necessarily so, right? It could also be true that the ease of setting up meetings is going through some kind of bottleneck, which makes it artificially difficult to meet students, for students to meet up. And that happens to correlate with other kinds of language skills, right? That make it, you know, like for some reason, your ability to understand email is related to your ability to pronounce words in a way that's expected for domestic volunteers, or sorry, for volunteers, right? So again, these are some of the items from the last slide, but presented, only the ones that showed a statistically significant difference. I really am stumbling over words now. Okay. Conclusions. So what can we learn from this? First of all, there could be a lot of reasons that partnerships don't work out in a VISAS program. I mean, I've heard a lot of them, but as the people who run VISAS programs, we should basically try to eliminate all the ones that are under our control, right? So we should make it as easy as possible for partners to reach each other, right? Not rely on, as I said before, bottlenecks, right? Especially if they're bottlenecks that international students have shown to have trouble with, have been shown to have trouble with in the past. Okay. So one of those in particular is email. So I sort of verified this in the survey, but I have had trouble reaching international students by email before, just in other contexts, not just for the visas program. It was enough of a problem so that halfway through this year, I started requiring signups for the visas program to give their phone numbers as well as their email addresses, just because so many volunteers were saying they were having trouble reaching their partners. And you can certainly understand why this would be so from the international student's perspective. If I went to a study abroad in China and I were getting 10 emails a day in Chinese from someone in my university's administration, I would probably pretty quickly give up on reading them, right? Emails are not written with learner English in mind most of the time. And although, in the ESL program, we try to write them in simpler language, it's just too much, right? So email in our case was serving as one such bottleneck to communication. And if there are other ways that we can facilitate setting up communication between partners, I'm certainly open to hearing from the people who watch this video. Someone at a presentation that I made last year mentioned having a social media account just for visas. I think that is a good idea, but it's also a lot more work. And maybe our student worker might want to do that, but I haven't done that as of yet. Right? So, again, the larger point, because so many factors of successful visas partnerships depended on the ease of setting up meetings, and people who had an easy time setting up meetings reported such positive results compared to those who didn't have an easy time setting up meetings. It behooves us as the people who run this program to think of ways to make communication easier between partners, to make that setting up of the meetings easier, right? So if you want these slides, use the QR code on the left. If you want to see sort of I have a Google Drive folder, which I share with other people who might want to start visas programs at their universities if they don't have one already. If you want that, use the QR code on the right. You can also just email me. My email address is at the top here. You can like and subscribe, leave a comment on this video if you want. Yeah, and I'll leave this page open for just a bit so you can finish scanning these with your phone. Thanks for listening. I hope your visas program is going well if you have one. I hope if you don't have one, you'll consider starting one. And if the pandemic, rears its ugly head again, and we're meeting online as we were during like 2021, I wouldn't mind sharing a Zoom room with some other university that has a similar visas program where all of our students can meet and, I don't know, talk about the weather. Talk about how much they enjoy the visas program, how much they miss having class in person. All right. I'll see you guys later.